Johnny Carson had spent more than half his life doing what very few people in history have ever mastered: talking to anyone about anything, live on television, without fear. For over 25 years, he sat behind the Tonight Show desk, night after night, interviewing more than 22,000 guests. Presidents, actors, musicians, comedians, astronauts, writers, people at the top of their fields, people trained to impress, persuade, and perform. Johnny sparred with the sharpest minds in America, disarmed the most difficult personalities, and turned awkward moments into legendary television. He was known for his control, his timing, his ability to recover instantly. In a quarter-century of live broadcasting, Johnny Carson had never been caught speechless. He had never frozen. He had never sat in silence, unable to respond. Until one quiet Tuesday night in October of 1987. October 14th began like any other Tonight Show taping. The NBC studios in Burbank, California were filled with familiar energy, comfortable, predictable, confident. Nearly 400 audience members took their seats under the warm studio lights, laughing and chatting, ready for another night of entertainment. The band was tuned, the cameras were positioned, the cue cards were written. The producers had planned a balanced show, a stand-up comedian, a cooking demonstration, and in between, a light human interest segment meant to make people smile before heading to bed. No one in that studio had any idea they were about to witness one of the most emotionally devastating moments in television history. The guest was a 105-year-old woman named Ethel Morrison. She was billed as America's oldest tap dancer, a cheerful curiosity, a feel-good story about defying age. When Ethel finally appeared from behind the curtain, she moved slowly, carefully, using a four-wheeled walker decorated with colorful ribbons and tiny bells that chimed softly with each step. She was barely 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighed less than 80 pounds. Her powder blue dress had been handmade by her granddaughter just for this appearance. Her white hair was carefully styled into victory rolls, a hairstyle she had worn faithfully since the 1940s. Her bright red lipstick matched her tap shoes perfectly, as if even at 105, presentation still mattered. The moment the audience saw her, they rose to their feet. The applause was immediate and overwhelming, lasting nearly a full minute. Ethel waved with delight, her hands trembling slightly from age but her smile full of life. Johnny Carson stood, walked around his desk, and gently offered his arm, guiding her to the guest chair with quiet respect. "Ethel Morrison, ladies and gentlemen," he announced warmly. 105 years young, and tap dancing since 1919. The audience laughed and applauded again. Everything felt safe. Familiar. Exactly as planned. The interview began with humor and charm. Johnny asked about her daily routine, and Ethel answered with sharp wit that instantly won over the room. She joked about waking up each morning, checking the obituaries to make sure her name wasn't listed, and then celebrating another day by putting on her dancing shoes. The audience laughed loudly. Johnny smiled, relaxed, clearly enjoying the moment. This was exactly the kind of segment he had done hundreds of times before: sweet, entertaining, forgettable in the best possible way. But then, without warning, the tone shifted. Just as Johnny glanced down at his note cards to move on to the next light-hearted question, Ethel leaned forward slightly. Her smile faded. Something in her eyes changed, something deeper, sharper, more serious. She looked at Johnny, then at the camera, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Mr. Carson," she said, using his formal name, "may I tell you something nobody wants to hear from a 105-year-old woman?" The laughter stopped instantly. The studio fell into complete silence. Johnny hesitated, sensing that this was no longer entertainment, but something else entirely. Years of experience told him this moment mattered. He nodded gently. "Of course, Ethel," he said. "This is your time. Say whatever you'd like." What followed would change everything. Ethel looked straight into the camera and began listing facts, not dramatically, not emotionally, but plainly, as if stating the weather. She spoke of burying 2 husbands. Of burying 4 of her 6 children. Of burying 13 of her closest friends. Then she paused and mentioned burying her baby sister just the year before, the sister she had always believed would outlive her. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. The audience didn't move. No one coughed. No one whispered. The air itself seemed to grow heavier. Then Ethel said the words that Johnny Carson had never heard spoken so honestly on his stage. "I am exhausted, Mr. Carson," she said quietly. "I am deeply exhausted from such a long life." Johnny's smile vanished. His eyes widened slightly. For the first time in his career, he didn't know what to say. The audience, moments earlier laughing and relaxed, sat frozen, absorbing the weight of her truth. Ethel continued, explaining that everyone congratulated her for living so long. They called her blessed, inspiring, remarkable. But no one, not once in 105 years, had ever asked her if she was at peace with continuing. There was no bitterness in her voice, only honesty. After several long seconds of silence, Johnny finally leaned forward and asked a question that broke every Tonight Show rule. His voice was soft, almost fragile. "Ethel," he said, "do you genuinely want to keep going?" She took her time answering. "Some days," she said, "yes. Some days, no." Then she explained something society rarely admits, that while people celebrate longevity, they don't actually know how to treat very old people. They become symbols, stories, inspirations, not human beings with complex emotions. She explained that she wasn't depressed, wasn't hopeless, wasn't giving up. She had simply finished her journey. She had loved fully, learned deeply, and felt complete, and that truth made people uncomfortable. Johnny reached for his water glass. His hand trembled. Ethel then dismantled one of America's most comforting illusions, the idea that long life is earned through discipline and secrets. She laughed softly as she admitted she had smoked for decades, eaten bacon every morning, drank whiskey well into her 90s, and never exercised except for dancing because she loved it. "I didn't do anything right," she said. "I just didn't die." Longevity, she explained, wasn't a moral achievement. It was luck. Genetics. Charts. Johnny sat silently, struggling to respond. Then Ethel delivered the final truth, the one that broke him completely. She explained that the worst part of living so long wasn't pain, or loss, or loneliness. It was realizing that everything she had learned, the truths that cost her decades to understand, would die with her. People didn't want truth, she said. They wanted comfort. They wanted cute stories, not reality. They didn't want to hear that most of what they worried about didn't matter, that most achievements would be forgotten, that life was temporary and fragile. As she spoke, tears streamed down Johnny Carson's face. The mask he had worn for decades disappeared entirely. For 17 long seconds, no one spoke. No one moved. The Tonight Show ceased to be a show and became something raw and human. Johnny finally stood, walked across the stage, and embraced Ethel Morrison. When he returned to his desk, wiping his eyes openly, he looked into the camera and said, "I have absolutely nothing to add here." The segment lasted 23 minutes instead of 6. Within hours, NBC's phone lines were overwhelmed with calls from viewers thanking the network for airing something so painfully honest. Ethel Morrison passed away peacefully 7 weeks later. The day after her appearance, she told her family, "I finally said what I needed to say. I'm at peace now." Johnny Carson later said that in 23 minutes, Ethel Morrison taught him more about life than 25 years of interviews ever had. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop talking and let the truth be heard.